Ceridwen Lloyd Morgan was formerly head of manuscripts and visual images at the National Library of Wales, where for many years she worked on artists' archives. Her publications on Welsh art include volumes on Gwen John, Mary Lloyd Jones and Claudia Williams, and she has also co-edited collections of essays with Ifor Davies and with Christine Kinsey. Recently, we received a generous gift of artworks from Ceridwen, which she had collected carefully over many years, and we are very grateful to her as a library for donating her collection. Jill Piercy is an exhibition curator and writer specialising in the visual arts in Wales. For 6 years, she was the Arts and Crafts Officer for the National Eisteddfod of Wales, and she has shown work from Wales in London, Europe and the USA. Her publications include articles, catalogue essays and the biography of Brenda Chamberlain. Her exhibitions include a touring retrospective of Brenda Chamberlain, textile hangings by Mary Lloyd Jones, knitwear by Sasha Kagan, mixed media works by the group Ferched and also the Women Artists in Wales exhibition at MoMA Machynlleth in 2021. Morfudd Bevan is our art curator at the National Library of Wales and looks after and develops Wales's national art collections at the library. Morfudd has worked in many different areas of the National Library of Wales, from working with the library's exhibition department for 3 years and becoming member of the digitisation unit as well. But since 2014, she has worked with the library's graphic collections and became art curator in 2019. Since then, she has played a vital role to develop the collections to ensure that women's art is fully represented. I'm glad to say that she is transforming our national art collection to celebrate the diversity of Wales and to truly represent the individuals and communities we serve. So it is my pleasure to pass you on to the panel, and please welcome our panel for this evening.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Nia. It's a great pleasure to be here, back in the National Library, and especially to have the chance to take part in this discussion of women's art, slightly in advance of International Women's Day tomorrow. I think most women, and some men too, of my generation and older will remember that when in our formative years, that women were largely absent from the art collections in our museums and galleries and so on. And if we turn to books on history of art, they too were very much dominated by men's work. So for women growing up, I think until well into the second part of the 20th century, there was a lack of role models. There was a lack of a visible tradition in which we could position ourselves. There was a big change, however, I think from the beginning of the 1970s, thanks to the second wave of feminism, the women's movement that really increased by leaps and bounds. And I was lucky enough to be off to university in 1970 when this was all starting, so it was a very exciting time. And this, of course, is when a lot of women, a lot of feminists decided, well, hang on, there must be more women artists, writers, musicians, and so on, and started digging around and doing their research. And lo and behold, they came up with all these wonderful artists and discovering hidden in galleries and all over the place fantastic works which began to document our visual history. And so that from then on, that we and publications coming through And so by now we've got a far better view, I think, of women's art in the past, but there's still an awful lot to do. And we were just discussing earlier on that probably just as a lot of poems and so on were probably composed by women but are now attributed to a non, so too there are probably many works in our collections which are anonymous but actually were probably by women. And it was very exciting recently when Mary Bain Owen came to the library to give a talk on the artist Gwenny Griffiths, that she'd been able to show that Gwenny was in fact the artist of a portrait of Margaret Lloyd George. So there are these, the progress is going on. I'd just like to briefly talk about some of the factors that have affected this largely, the fact that women have been largely absent from, I think, the canon of art historically. And of course, women's work was belittled, disparaged. Women were regarded as amateurs, and there were many reasons for that. I mean, first of all, of course, how would they get access to the training when so many, when all the training schools were closed to women? It was the Slade really which made such a difference in the latter part of the 19th century, when women artists like Gwen John and indeed Gwenny Griffiths were able at last to get a proper training equivalent to that of the men. But nonetheless, they were still subjected to slightly different treatment. And men remained largely the gatekeepers of exhibitions and so on. Thinking about Wales in particular, if we think about the gentry, women in the gentry class might well be taught how to do some genteel little watercolours, but they were very circumscribed in what both the medium that they were allowed to use, apart from watercolour, maybe a bit of embroidery, but the subjects were very circumscribed as well. I mean, very difficult for a woman to decide she wanted to do a big oil painting of Trafalgar or something like this. It would not really be on. Whereas for working women, I'm thinking about some of my own ancestors, they would have no access to materials or time because they would be so much involved with domestic duties and perhaps also working in industry as well, like women working in the lead mines around here. But they still were able to express themselves visually, but within media like quilts and rag rugs and so on. And of course, this is something that Mary Lloyd Jones, one of our very, very important living artists, has emphasised that women have had to channel their energy so much into the applied arts. Now, fortunately, since Morfudd has been appointed as a curator here, I think, and working previously with Lona Mason, who is now retired, I think the tide is perhaps turning.
Well, I hope so. Over the last 10 years or so, myself and Lona Mason, who's now retired from the library, we made a real effort to develop our art collections. The National Library has been collecting artwork since its establishment in 1907. The main founder of the library, Sir John Williams, donated a fantastic collection of topographical prints to the library in 1907, which then became the basis of our art collection. And then Sir John Barringer, the first librarian, decided, based on these topographical prints, that the library would become a visual library of Wales as well as a traditional library. And therefore we had a art collection policy dating back to 1907, which is quite similar to the one which we have today, that we would collect Welsh portraits of Welsh characters, Welsh landscapes, images of Welsh events, and then later on the clause of general Welsh artworks would be included as well in that policy. And obviously, as Ceridwen said, the art collection, which dates back to that period, obviously has its flaws. There are gaps, historical gaps within the collections. Many groups are not fairly represented within the collection. And this is, as Ceridwen said, because women weren't allowed the same opportunities and were discriminated against in the art, especially in art education as well. And therefore, we've been trying to rectify this and look at all those historical gaps, develop our art collections and what's really important is that we support contemporary female artists who are working today in Wales, and there's some fantastic artists out there. And also looking at those historical gaps as well, and also just showcasing the works by female artists which we have in the library. So I've been giving quite a few talks to Art UK. Jill kindly invited me to give a talk on women artists' works which we have in our collections in conjunction with the exhibition at Morfudd on women in art. I gave a talk to the National Eisteddfod on Brenda Chamberlain. And so all these factors play a part, and our exhibitions department have been making a have played a pivotal role in this, in displaying works by female artists in our exhibitions. We had a fantastic exhibition down in our satellite gallery in Haverfordwest a few years ago, where Mary Ellen Jones curated a fantastic exhibition looking at the gaze in art history, how women have been portrayed through history, looking at John Berger and Laura Mulvey's arguments about the power of the spectator and that women have often been objectified in art. So it's just doing these little changes and supporting female artists who are working in Wales today and who are creating really interesting works as well.
I think that ties in really with the work that Peter Lord has been doing as well. Not just finding women artists who have not known, but all the male artists as well. Because until he started doing his delving into people's attics and searching through auction catalogues and finding works, I mean, it's only then that the history of Welsh art has really developed.
Yes, and I think Peter's made the very important point from the very beginning of his career of trying to open the door on these treasures, is that in the past the definition of art has been extremely narrow, and it's privileged the very academic art, the kind of thing the Royal Academy approved of and so on. Whereas I think, fortunately by now, I think because of the developments from the late 1960s onwards, we have a much more generous definition of art, and we're more accepting of work in a variety of media and in a variety of styles. Perhaps this is the point at which perhaps we could just talk about the difference between the collection policy of the National Library and the collection policy of its sister institution, the National Museum, because I think there's often a lot of confusion about this. I mean, obviously their collections too have been subject to some of the same problems as that of the library, insofar that they were started back beginning of the 20th century, incorporated some pre-existing collections, which were perforce dominated by men. But I think it would be very useful and helpful for people to really understand, the distinction between the two collection policies.
I think with our collection policy, as I said, it means in a sense that we're a visual library of Wales as well as a traditional library. But since then, it's evolved, obviously, to include the clause of general Welsh artworks as well. And we've been great supporters of Welsh art across the decades because of the way we've been collecting. And not just the way we've been collecting artworks, but the artists' archives, which we also hold in the library. We've got some fantastic archives, Gwen John archives, diaries, letters, Ray Howard Jones' works, Brenda Chamberlain, just to name a few. But those archives are really important, giving the full story of the artist's life and work. With the National Museum, I'm not certain of their exact collection policy, but I think a number of factors played a role in how they developed their collections, such as the Brygynnog sisters, fantastic donation of artworks to them, of impressionistic works by such artists as Monet and Cézanne. I think maybe that changed their route a little, and that they collected as well in an European context as well, whilst we collected in more of a Welsh context.
So perhaps it would be fair to say that the museum's policy focuses on art from the sort of aesthetic point of view, whereas the National Library has more freedom because we can develop the collections with works which are perhaps mainly documentary in terms of portraits, landscapes, depictions of people, coal miners or quarrymen or whatever it might be, or farmers, women spinning, but that doesn't. But then it's broad enough a policy that the library can also choose works on the basis of their aesthetic quality or other significance within our history, perhaps.
Yes, that's true, I think. And that's, in a way, as I said, because we're, in a sense, a documentary, we're a visual library of Wales, in a sense. So maybe that's thinking of women art as well, women's art in Wales, and maybe that's made it easier for them to gain access at times as well. But as you said, the number of works in our collections which we don't know, maybe the name of the creator, or we might have the name of the creator as a female artist, we don't know any much more about the work. So it's about trying to get those images out there, and digitisation has played its part with this. We were donated about 29 drawing volumes by the Cummings sisters, who travelled North Wales during the beginning of the 20th century. But we don't have much more information about them apart from these fantastic drawings they created across these 29 volumes. And we've since digitised these and placed them on the Cascad Awerin website, the People's Collection website. And through doing so, we're inviting people to comment and give us any information they have about these works. So it's a constantly work in progress, in a sense. And I think it's just making the collections accessible to the public and asking for information.
Probably encouraging people to come here and do their research.
Yes, yeah.
And fill that history out.
Yes, because it's when researchers come here. I mean, whether it's Mary Bainon looking for stuff by Gwenny Griffiths, or you many years ago working on Brenda Chamberlain, that researchers very often, they've got more time than the staff. The staff have to do their catalogues, but researchers very often are coming at the material from a different point of view, and may have a huge. I mean, I know when you started work on the Brenda Chamberlain material, both the visual work and the written archive, that suddenly you were able to tap into a lot of personal information that you'd acquired by meeting people by who Brenda had known, and suddenly we had so much more information, a lot of which, of course, is crystallised in Jill's marvellous biography of Brenda Chamberlain.
Yeah, I think how that worked really was that Brenda Chamberlain's archive, well, part of it had been gifted to the National Library, but it was in a muddle because it's how she recorded everything in her life. She would start one journal in 1953, and then she'd suddenly jump to 1964, and then go back to turn it upside down perhaps and start at the back in 19 65, so everything was out of sequence. And I was very fortunate in that so many of her friends were still alive, so I could go and visit them and start to make sense of what was here and put it in some kind of order. But there was so much material, there would be no chance of the staff here.
No, there's simply no time.
Go through it.
No, I mean, the job of the cataloguer is basically to give some kind of idea to the prospective user of what there is, do their best to date things, do their best to identify them. But the pressure of work, I mean, particularly now, I think I was very privileged in the time I was here that when working on the Gwen John archive, for example, that there was actually time to spend, you know, where you might spend, you know, a whole day working on one letter. I mean, that's now, you know, it's like a forgotten age, you know. But so increasingly, I think the library is going to depend on researchers to come. And I think the point you've made about, you know, getting the book out and so on, it's really important that people who do research, I think, do share that research, either by talking to the staff and saying, look, I've discovered that that must be the date, or I know this correspondent is this, or the sitter in this portrait is this person, or, oh, I know that farm, I can identify that location. We do need to pool and share our resources, and to get that information out there. I think the worst thing we do is when we discover something is just keep it to ourselves, you know. We do, and it's much more exciting when we can share and these things.
I think the other thing I found as well is that I was finding material in other institutions that connected to what was in this archive, and I think making those links is valuable for the researcher and for the institutions themselves.
Yes.
Just to join up the dots.
Yeah,
really.
it does help. Yes.
We've spoken quite a bit about the National Library and the museum, and so these big official national public spaces. But Jill, of course, you've been involved in a lot of curatorial work with smaller institutions like the Mostyn. I remember, Brenda Chamberlain, wonderful exhibition there. But also more recently in the Tabernacle in Machynlleth. Would you like to speak a little bit about that?
Yes.
About your work for that?
Well, I was approached by Ruth Lambert, and she had decided that for the first time in the history of the gallery there, they wanted every exhibition in the building to be by women artists, which was fabulous. So Gerda Roper was showing downstairs. Natalie Chapman was on show as well, representing the younger generation. I was invited to go through the MoMA collection and choose any of the women artists there to create a show out of that. And then I was given carte blanche to do a show on women artists. And as this coincided with the beginning of lockdown, I found myself with more time on my hands to do the research, and I decided to pin it down to Welsh women artists. But then when I started looking into that, given that I had all these months to fill...
So we're talking about living artists here, aren't we?
No, not
necessarily. Any artist at all,
that had exhibited in Wales. So I went through all the Art UK catalogues. I went through all the exhibition catalogues that I had. I went through the dictionary of Welsh art and artists. I followed up as many leads as I could, and probably from the early 1900s to the present day, I found over 300 women artists, most of whom I'd never heard of, but they'd all at some point in their lives exhibited. But obviously that became too big. There was absolutely no way I could fit or find work by 300 artists, so I pared it down again, and I settled on women whose work I'd shown before, and perhaps I'd known for 20, 30 years, a lot of them I'd met through working with the National Eisteddfod, because we were able at that point to do a lot of studio visits and go and visit artists and see their back catalogue of work, which really put their work into context rather than just seeing one out of context. So in the end, I settled on 27 women artists. And thankfully, I did know their work really well, because it was impossible to do studio visits during lockdown. So I had to rely on knowing that the quality of their work was of a calibre that I'd be totally happy with. And also we were fortunate to get a small grant from Paul Mellon to do a small publication.
Which I believe is on sale outside. So when you leave,
so
do pick this up. Yeah.
It features 27 of the artists that were in that exhibition. The youngest was in her 20s, and the oldest, who was Glenys Kerr, and still working, in her 90s. So there was a big span of ages, a big span of styles. And we were also able to have a series of lectures as well as the little brochure, which Morfudd took part in, Peter Lloyd took part, and various other speakers on different topics. Catherine Webster is another one.
And perhaps we should just note here that the good news that we had not so long ago, that Catherine Webster had been appointed as the head of the School of Art here in Aberystwyth, with the first woman ever to hold that post, which I think it's taken a long, long time.
Yes. But I also have to acknowledge Moira Vincentelli.
Indeed, well, who is with us this evening.
She is. Because when I was doing the research for this exhibition, I realised that the last time there'd been an exhibition of women artists in Wales had been 36 years earlier, which was when Moira curated an exhibition in the Mostyn. And that's a huge time span with nothing happening.
No, and in fact, it's interesting that this is a process that you can see also with the history of women's writing, that there seems to be, despite the best efforts of all of us, there seem to be waves. So we have a period when we rediscover people, or women artists or women writers or whatever, and we celebrate that, and we have an exhibition, or there are lots of books come out. And then, rather than those creative women being admitted into the sort of permanent canon of the history of our culture, that they then get forgotten again. I'm just, not so long ago, a book came out from Hon, which is a set of writings by Welsh-speaking women. And there was one there that really struck me, by Grieg Muse, where she's talking about two women poets, one from the end of the 17th century, one from the 18th century. And these are two women poets that some of us were working on back in the 1980s. And Grieg was now discovering them and saying, why wasn't I told about them? And it's exactly the same with women artists, that they're, each generation of us, I hope, rediscovers these women and says, look, you bring them out here. Look at this. This is wonderful. This is this woman's history. And then they get forgotten again. So it's work that we have to keep on doing. And here I think the library has a role to play, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. Well, I think digitisation has played a big part in as well, making the collections more accessible to people. And the public are welcome to come in any time to view our collections in the reading room, and that includes the artworks as well. So it's and we've been working a lot with different authors who've been publishing books on artists, such as David Moore and Ray Howard Jones recently published Ray Howard Jones supplied images for the book. That's a daily part of our work, and it's really important as well. So we play our part in so many different ways, in a sense, and we just want to emphasise that the works are the people's works, and that you're welcome to come in any time to view them in the reading room, just by making an appointment. And
Which the point about accessibility and so on reminds me that perhaps the most popular art exhibition in Wales every year, the one visited by the most people in a short space of time, is the show in the Eisteddfod. I mean, any of you who were in Pontypridd last year would have seen the sort of... It almost made you seasick. There were so many people coming through all the time. And that is a show where... fortunately, by now, a lot of women are represented, but it was not always so, as Jill knows. Jill, of course, was for a number of years the celf, the arts officer of the National Eisteddfod. But also from your work on Brenda Chamberlain, you've looked a bit into the history of this, haven't you?
Yes. It was quite often difficult for women to be taken seriously in the Eisteddfod. Because it was all the great and the good. Augustus John was the judge one year, and it would be the men who would flock and want their work to be seen by him. There was it was a different attitude to showing work. There were very few at that time, I suppose, in the early 20th century, there were very few art galleries in Wales. So there was very little opportunity to show your work once you created it. So the Eisteddfod was a pinnacle, really. And some of the exhibitions had thousands and thousands of pictures in them. They were hung like the Royal Academy show from floor to ceiling. The Eisteddfod's gone through different phases. Sometimes it was an enormous exhibition. Then at different periods of time, it would go off the Eisteddfod field and be held in school halls and village halls. So you had to make a big effort to go and see it. And I suppose it changed again when I became the art and crafts officer. My first main exhibition was here in Aberystwyth in '92. And the standing committee, the way the Eisteddfod works is a different tiered. At the top is the Eisteddfod Council, who have the view of looking at the strategy and long-term aims and purposes of the overall Eisteddfod. And then there are what's known as the standing committees, who those members oversee particular departments, maybe over a 3 to 5 year period. And they advise the local committees, who are self-appointed by the local people wherever the Eisteddfod goes. So what happened here in Aberystwyth was there are very strong personalities on the standing committee, like Peter Lord.
Who sent his apologies this evening? And
Harry James, Marion Delleth. And they decided they wanted to bring to the Eisteddfod a more professional attitude, I suppose, because it had been, prior to that, there'd been competitions for a portrait painting, competitions for 3 mugs and a teapot, black and white photography. It was all separated into different competitions with different selectors choosing each competition. So the overall quality was up and down depending on who the selectors were. So in Aberystwyth, that was just thrown in the air. Peter curated an enormous exhibition on the history of art in the Eisteddfod, art and crafts in the Eisteddfod, which was fabulous. I mean, how we got some of those pieces, I don't know. We had to create special rooms in a tent to house. I remember the conservation officer from the National Museum, we were loaning works from museums, and he said, well, we'll need to come and take temperature and atmospheric conditions every week from 3 weeks before you open. And I said, well, you're most welcome to come 3 weeks before, but you'll find a And it was impossible within those conditions. So we had to build a room with a suspended ceiling. We had extractor fans, dehumidifiers. We had to control the number of people that could go into the room at any one time in case they breathed too much. And there was too much carbon dioxide or affected the levels. 3 times a day I had to read all the machinery and fax through the readings to the curator at the National Museum. And I had to sign this document saying that if the readings varied by so many degrees, they had the right to come in and remove all the exhibits.
But fortunately, you had the work by contemporary artists.
We
if
did.
we can
Yes.
talk about the
Yes.
the policy, because it had been a very gendered show in the past, hadn't it? And I think one of the things that you strove to do,
yes,
in an objective way, was to improve that.
I mean, what I did to the best of my ability was when the entries came in. At that point in time, the entries were initially submitted by photograph slide, so they came on images, and we would look at them on a screen, and I wouldn't give the name of the artist. They just had a number. So the selectors would not know if they were done by a male artist or a female artist. Quite often they'd ask me, is that so-and-so's? And I say, no, that's number 33. And so I did my best to ensure that the works that were selected on quality and not any hidden agenda that those selectors came with.
And what was the result?
The result was a much wider representation of women showing. And over the years it meant that women felt more comfortable submitting because there was a lot of fear of being rejected and a lot of fear of not being taken seriously.
Yeah. Because of what had gone before, no doubt.
Absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
And not just in the Eisteddfod, but I think in the gallery world
Generally.
more generally, because
Yes.
very few women artists were able to make a living. I mean, I think Brenda Chamberlain was one of the few artists that I've come across that was able to survive by her art and her writing.
Well, and including her writing, so she had 2 strings to her bow.
Yeah.
Yes.
She did depend on both of them. She
Yes.
couldn't have done it just with one.
Yeah. But I think the other aspect of your work, I think, which is important that time as Sylw Celf, was that you were able to make the successful artists known more widely too. Which I think was a really important contribution because clearly, again, linking this into what you've just been saying about making a living.
Yes. I mean, what I started to do was to follow the winners each year and give them every marketing opportunity that I could, and also was able to introduce them to galleries outside of Wales. And we made a very good link with the John Davis Gallery in London, who then started showing the work of the winners in London. And around about that time, Martin Tinney was opening his gallery in Cardiff, and he would come to the Eisteddfod and see who were the up-and-coming artists. I mean, here in Aberystwyth, Shani Rhys-James won the gold medal, and Martin immediately gave her a show in Cardiff, and she then went on to win the Hunting Art Prize and go on winning prizes, and her reputation grew and grew and is still growing.
Yes.
So there were those opportunities to get work out, and for a brief period of time there was a Cardiff Art Fair, and I took a stand at the art fair and took the winners there.
Really important.
But it's very, very difficult to keep that momentum going.
Yeah. I think perhaps it would be useful here to talk about some of the private galleries, I mean, like Martin Tinney's, but I think we perhaps maybe two factors in the success of Tinney's venture done in Cardiff. One was that by the time he was going, there was a middle class who had the disposable income to start collecting art. Though I have to say that I remember when you were art officer of the Eisteddfod, that because we had the Arts Council system for
the
collector plan, yes. That, I mean, I built up a lot of my collection myself through that. That really helped to get people to go to the Eisteddfod and think, oh yes, I'll buy that. But so that's one aspect. But also the fact that, in a sense, Tinney was not the first one. No. That there were, and interestingly, I think we've discussed this before between us, that there were women who were running pioneering galleries in Wales.
Yeah, we have Gwyn Brown in the Tegvin Gallery.
Which I remember going to in the 60s when I was at school.
In Bridge,
yes.
She ran a very successful gallery there, which in fact Martin Tinney took over later on. And Mary Yap in Cardiff, her gallery is still going, the Albany Gallery. And there were various couples, like the people in the Attic Gallery in Swansea, who set up a very successful art gallery there, and Liz Organ in the Kilvert Gallery in Cliro. So there were women working, promoting in their own right, and I suppose that ties in with the patrons like the Davis sisters.
Indeed, yes.
And Winifred Coombe-Tennant.
Yes, I was just thinking about it. But did Winifred Coombe-Tennant buy work by women?
Don't think so.
I don't think so. No. What struck me, though, I think when you were talking about Augustus John and so on being a judge at the Eisteddfod, of course, in the 1930s, I forget what the exact date was, is that 35 or something, the Eisteddfod, National Eisteddfod was in Fishguard, and because it was in Pembrokeshire, Gwen John was persuaded to send in a painting. But it's also then that the Contemporary Art Society starts really collecting, and of course it was a woman, Frances Byng Stamper, who was one of the most influential people there, and of course some of the Casu accessions have come to the library now, haven't they, Morfudd?
They've been great supporters of us since the end of the Second World War. They've been donating fantastic works to us, and I gave a talk to Casu.
Perhaps we should explain who they are.
Casu, the Contemporary Art Society of Wales, which was established, I think, in the 1940s after the Second World War to support contemporary art in Wales. They would buy works from artists and then donate the works to institutions around Wales, being ourselves, National Museum, other galleries, libraries, hospitals, and I gave a talk to Casu members in Cardiff a few years ago, and I was astounded by how many, over 100 works, they've donated over 100 works to us across the years. And what's interesting is that many of the works which many of our iconic works from our collections were donated by Casu, such as Vase of Flowers by Gwen John.
Which is in the exhibition.
Which is in the exhibition upstairs. And another one, Pontypridd at Night by Esther Granger, is up in the gallery as well. And Esther Granger is an artist, is a female artist who has been overlooked in history. She was part of the Rhondda group and did a lot of fantastic work in the community in Pontypridd in the 40s, and she's an example of an artist who deserves better recognition as a female artist, but has been overlooked. But I think more research is being done into her now, and we've been making an effort to build our collection of works by Esther Granger across the years. In 2017, we were given a fantastic collection of contemporary Welsh artworks by Carol and Herbert Dresser, of around 70 works, and a lot of those works were by female artists. About 3 of those works by Esther Granger, many works by Glenys Cor were in that collection, and Mary Lloyd Jones, so these collections have been really important. And going back to Casso, I realised when I gave the talk that a number of the works they donated to us were by female artists. So they've played a really important role in developing our collections as well. So it's these donations as well. And as Nia, who was introducing us, said, Ceridwen's given us a fantastic collection of works of art, and many amazing women artists are in that collection. So we're really grateful for these, and these collections the donations do help us with the financial struggles at the moment we're all facing. So yeah, it all helps, definitely. Yeah.
Yes. I think we've got a little bit of time left. I want to ensure that we've got plenty of time for you as the audience to ask questions or to make comments and so on. And I'd actually like to ask you in the audience a question, which is, do any of you collect art? Do any of you help living artists by buying their work? Yeah, there's some hands very tentatively going, don't be shy, don't be shy. That's absolutely wonderful. Because without selling their work, women artists are never going to survive. As Jill said, Brenda Chambers is really an exception in being able to have been a full-time creative person rather than, say, having to combine.
Well, I also think it helped that she was very frugal.
Yes. Yes.
She probably lived on very little money.
Yes, I don't think most women artists are in the same category as Shani James, bless her, who has done very, very well. One point we've not really talked about is role models, of course. And thinking about Brenda Chamberlain, I remember when I was working with Mary Lloyd Jones on a book in Welsh about her development as an artist, that one of the things that she mentioned was that when she was a student and so on, how important Brenda Chamberlain was for her as a role model, because there was no other Welsh woman who was actually following a career as an artist. And I think it's really, I mean, since we're here to celebrate women's art, I think it's so important now that the younger generation do have those role models. They can come here and look to see what their foremothers were doing. And we now have, obviously people like Moira and Sheila Hurin, when their years teaching in the School of Art, were able to provide role models for the students.
In fact, it was Sheila who pointed me in the direction of Brenda Chamberlain.
Well, there we are. Yes, it's these little nudges that we all need from time to time. We'll turn the discussion over to you as an audience now. So, do you have questions, comments? Would you like to elaborate on any points that we haven't covered so far? Moira. For those who don't know, Moira Vincentelli for many years taught in the School of Art in Aberystwyth and was very much involved with promoting women's art. And we've mentioned earlier on the important exhibition. Can it really be 36 years ago?
Oh, it's longer than that now. It's 36 before.
Oh, well, yes.
Before the one I did.
I just wanted to raise the issue about women's art and textiles, because obviously that has been enormously important in Wales, and I mean it is in general, that women, and when I did that exhibition in '84, I was actually looking for, it was kind of the early stages of, how feminism was on its way, but a lot of people, I wasn't allowed to teach women a course on women's art in the 1980s. That was kind of not accepted. So it was kind of difficult. But I was looking for also the way that women often did things that actually put them outside. I mean, in other words, if they did certain kind of decorative work, if they did embroidery, or used embroidery, and quite a number of them were using textiles in that show.
Well, I'm wearing one. This is Sasha Kagan.
Sasha Kagan, yes.
Who made her living with mainly with producing knitting patterns for Women's Weekly, and then creating wonderful books of her knitwear designs. So she's one example.
Yes. I mean, it's just very difficult to represent them in the National Library. That's my point. I imagine that you're not collecting quilts. There's another place that might be, but,
We've been developing a collection of textile works. Recently we acquired work by Anya Paintson into the collections, the second work by Anya. She focuses on her Welsh and Ghanaian heritage in her works and creates these fantastic textile works, often portraits, and she looks at the racism she experienced growing up in North Wales, where she was brought up in the Welsh language, but she's made an amazing name for herself. And at university in north of England, I think she went to university, but people would tell her, why don't you do proper art instead of textile work? Why don't you paint? Why don't you? But she said no, and so she's in her work, she tries to elevate the status of her medium as well, but she's made an amazing name for herself. She did a fantastic exhibition out in the Hannah Trour gallery in New York recently, and amazing article in Vanity Fair about her work. So we've been really developing the gaps we have in our collections by other groups as well, which are underrepresented, and we've been really trying to develop those collections. So.
Yeah. I'll add one little thing, because I sort of remember, because I was actually a selector with Jill, when Jill was in that first year of the changing exhibition, I remember fighting very hard to include one of the prize winners was a piece of lace.
That's right, yes.
And I thought, it's so easy, because in the past, that lace work had been there, but in a competition, a sort of sideline competition. And it was like, this has got to be the main thing.
No, it was one of the winners.
Yes.
One of the prize winners in the end. And it was exhibited alongside the more contemporary work, but it was a traditional craft, but it was an artwork in itself, wasn't it?
I mean, the idea was, this would send out a message. I don't know how many people were doing embroidery at once.
But I think it's because that sort of work, because it was seen as such gendered a genre within art. And it's interesting, I mean, the way that Mary Lloyd Jones remembers her days as a student, when the women were, she really had to fight to get to go to the painting class, because the girls were supposed to do fashion design and textiles and things, and this which was kind of trying to reinforce that idea. It's just something that sort of amateurish that women, the sort of pointless embroidery that girls had to do while they were waiting for Mr. Right to come along and marry them. But again, thinking about that period in the 80s, I was very shocked when I came back to Wales in 1980, because I'd been 10 years in England and France, and I couldn't believe how backward things were in Wales. And it was such a revelation, that there were people like Moira and Sheila here who were actually trying to get things going and to foreground women's work and to celebrate that. Anybody?
Yeah, we have a lot to thank you for, Moira, for introducing.
I mean, of course, it's mainly in ceramics. That's my main research has been that.
Yeah, but I think you've become one of those role models that Ceridwen was talking about, and helped a lot of us along our way.
Anybody else with comments or questions? Yes, one up in the gallery.
Yes, I'm Catherine, so I heard my
Oh,
name
hello,
mentioned
Catherine.
earlier on. And it's just fascinating as well to hear the kind of background that Jill was talking about with the Eisteddfod and the change of policy and the anonymity of the entries and how that was, because actually that was my introduction to exhibiting, was from the Slade to the National Eisteddfod, and that really kick-started my kind of career as an artist, and then has full looped back round into Aberystwyth. So it's sort of fascinating to hear that that was like a deliberate sort of policy to kind of promote much more equality. So I can see that. And when I was I was a student at the Slade, and I always used to wonder whether there was some remnant of Gwen John's painting, because the floors were very, very heavily painted with layers and layers of dropped paint, and if you excavated down far enough with it, you might find something of Gwen John's in there. So that I kind of having those sorts of aspirations, that they were role models going back, that there was this history that was in the institutions, and it's great then that now in these institutions there's new history.
Yes, and I think your reference to Gwen John there brings out really a very important point, which is that what we don't want to have is that the focus is purely on a lot of big names. Everybody's heard of Gwen John in a sense, and I think that tends to hide the history of so many other women who were working perhaps in very different media, very different styles, but are equally important in terms of our culture and the history of our culture. How do you see your role, Catherine, as head of the School of Art?
How do I feel it?
Yes, I mean, are there things you want to achieve, and are some of those to do with gender?
I think just sort of diversity in general. I mean, one of the things I've been trying to do is put more disabled access into the building and things like that. So, and opening up the galleries and having different exhibitions. And we've got actually another kind of role model from when I was in the Slade, a tutor, Sharon Morris, who's a professor at the Slade, is doing a collaborative exhibition with us at the moment with the National Library, which is looking at artist books. I mean, it's not about specific genders or anything like that, but it is very diverse because it's not a different approach, different way, like you're saying about if we focus on big names, you miss. But if you look at different types of art forms, like you were suggesting, like looking at textiles, if you look at work that's book work or paper work or work with words, that's a different sort of entry into art. So it's like I'm trying to, I suppose, engage different audiences in that way as well. But yes, I've only been there a year and a half so far, so lots of things to do.
Yes, oh well. Onwards, yes. Anybody else with a comment or a question? I don't know whether people online have the chance to put questions.
Yeah, nothing's come in yet.
Nothing's come in, right, yes. Well, it is coming up to 6 o'clock, and I think we have covered most of the ground that we had in mind. So, well, I'd like to thank my co-panellists, Morfudd and Jill. It's been really nice working with both of them, and I think Nia has a few closing words to say.
Just a word of thanks as well. I think can we show our appreciation for the panel for this fascinating discussion we've had this evening. As an archivist at the library, I can't help feeling that there's much more research still to do here. The collections are constantly developing and evolving. There are new collections coming in all the time. So you're very welcome to come to the library to do your research. Just during this talk today, I was thinking that there are some collections, archives come in recently. For example, a small collection of Vera Bassett material. We've had the archive of Martin Tinney, both his galleries, which include a lot of files to do with different artists. There's a lot of interesting material there. And we're in some Claudia Williams material has come in, her workbooks. and we're in discussion with different artists and women artists at the moment. So please contact us at the library if you're interested in anything in particular which is not yet on the catalogue, but there may be some more new research material here, and we're very welcoming to anybody who wants to come to use our collections. So to close, we want to thank our panellists, and it was a really fascinating discussion, and I'm very grateful to all of you for your input into that discussion. Thanks to everybody who has joined us today in the National Library and also online. And there are a number of events now, from now until September, in association with the current No Welsh Art exhibition. The next event in this In Focus series is entitled No Welsh Patrons, and this is with Peter Lord, the curator, and also Oliver Fairclough, which looks at the Welsh patrons, the Wynns of Winstay, the Davies sisters of Llandinam, and Winifred Cwm-Tennant, which we've already mentioned. So look at our website for more details about the next event. Also, there are guided tours around the exhibitions, which are very popular, and these take place on the first Wednesday of the month between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. So again, if you'd like to see the exhibition, being guided around the exhibition with the curator, there's an opportunity for you to do that. Our next event at the library is Where the Folk, a Welsh folklore road trip. This is a talk by storyteller Russ Williams on the myths and legends of Wales. And this is on Thursday, the 20th of March at 1 o'clock here in the Drum and also online. And a sneak peek as well for a forthcoming panel discussion to do with sign records, and that will include Dafydd Iwan, Gwennan Gibbard and Kev Tame. So look out for that on our website. So diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd sydd wedi ymuno gyda ni heno yma ac ar-lein. Thank you all for joining us for this occasion, a diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Diolch.